Hello, everybody. This is Chuck, and unfortunately, I don't have Omar nor my co-host Marcos today. It's just good old Chuck. And today I have Ali Siadatan back with me. I think I might have butchered that last name, but he can let me know right now. And a little bit about him. Ali is the founder of the Think Again Productions in Canada, a multimedia teaching ministry shedding light on mysteries and treasures of scriptural knowledge coming from the Lord to this generation, knowledge which is making the Bible more real than ever. Just when we thought it was all a myth, evidence keeps agreeing with the Bible tale, from biblical cities peering through the sand to alien abductions and prophetic events. The mysteries of the Bible have opened up to our generation in a way no other could see it. Welcome to the show, Ali Siadatan. Is that right? How's your last name pronounced, man?
Yes, Siadatan. That's pretty good. That's good enough.
That's good enough, huh?
Chuck, it's great to be here.
Nice. Welcome back, man. It's been a while. Last we spoke was a year ago, over a year ago. And I've been listening to more of your work, and I'm just like, wow, we need to have him back on the show,
Thank you.
Indeed. And, well, by the title, folks, you might know already, we want to talk a lot of interesting things. We want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the Nephilim things. We want to dive a little bit deeper into the alien things and what does that have to do with the Bible? Because I don't know about you, Ali, but I have a lot of conversations with people, and I actually tell them, like, well, the alien phenomenon is actually tied with a lot of things that happen in ancient times in the Bible, and they're like baffled by it. Like, there's no way that's not possible, and right. I don't know if you've encountered that. I'm sure you have, but yes. I think that's exactly why you've started your ministry, because
yes.
It just seems that a lot of people don't understand that there is actually indeed a very strong connection with the ancient past and ancient biblical past, and other ancient things that are like related to that time, where there seems to be a connection to aliens and Nephilim and all these gods of old and all kinds of stuff like that. Wouldn't you agree, Ali?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You want me to open that up for you right now?
Dive deep. Like, for example, one thing, I guess, more specific. Let's get a little bit more specific, I guess, and let's start off with, for example, actually, before we get into that, I know I read an intro to you, and if you haven't listened to our first episode, folks, I suggest you go back. It's a really good one, and Ali has tons of information on a lot of interesting things that has to do with, like, the Michael Heiser stuff, that the Deuteronomy 32 worldview that it's been coined on here. The Council of God and the fallen ones and things like that. But tell us a little bit about yourself, that maybe people didn't listen to that episode and they're like, hey, who is this Ali guy? How did you get into this? What's going on,
In December of 2000, I was driving with my dad and his wife late at night in the desert of Iran, from the city of Tehran towards Isfahan. And we had a close-up UFO sighting, and it kind of shocked me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And when I came back home to Canada, I started to look into it and realized that many people were having sightings, and I could now kind of believe it because I just had one. Mm. And so as I started to dig deeper, and came into contact with the ancient astronaut theorists like Zachary Sitchin, von Däniken, and all these guys. And I was studying the Word of God at the same time with a gentleman. And he kind of proposed the idea that this is actually the way that the angels of God have always interacted with the human race throughout Scripture. And it's only, our generation that's able to see it for what it is. Perhaps this is what's going on. The modern day UFO phenomenon is not modern. And so this kind of got me going on this search that led to this documentary released in 2006 called UFOs, Angels, and Gods, where we put together the relationship with the flying chariots that are in the Bible, the modern-day UFO phenomenon, and the gods that existed over the nations, the hybrid offsprings, the demigods, the titans, or the Nephilim in the Hebrew, and the whole modern day abduction phenomenon, how all this connected together. And so we were really one of the first documentaries actually that put all this together. And I put it up on Google Video because YouTube was just a very young thing and everyone was betting Google Video, and it just went viral. We got 270,000 views, which was a lot for 2006.
Right.
People didn't have access to audiovisual through the internet yet. A lot of people didn't have internet that was fast enough. And we became one of the most popular items on Google Video. So when you logged in, you had 6 documentaries that appeared on the front page, and ours was one of them. And so I realized that there really was a thirst for understanding these things in our generation. And over the years that I've seen other people come forward with their research with similar perspectives. And this tells me that this really is something that God is opening up for this generation of people because of what is ahead of us. We need to have an understanding of all of this. Now, to go back to kind of what you mentioned at the beginning as to how is it that this stuff, ties into the old stuff, and why is it that we have such a hard time seeing the connection? It has to do mainly with the cultural perspective that we've inherited about angels through church history. Partly two specific things. One is paintings. So a lot of our idea of angels actually comes from paintings of the Renaissance masters, like Michelangelo,
Right.
Donatello, all of these guys. They created these giant bird-like beings for us, like men with feather-like wings, like bird-like wings.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how they captured the idea of flight. It was their way of saying these guys are actually coming from elsewhere. Mm-hmm. But in the biblical account, in the scripture, actually, there is no passage where angels have bird-like wings, like the type of wings that a crane might have.
Right.
But that doesn't exist anywhere in the Bible.
Right.
This is simply, in our culture, people who do read the Bible have other things that they are looking into, things that pertain to their daily life, to being healed, to being enlightened, to connecting deeper to God, to finding answers to questions. Angels are not top on people's minds, other than perhaps it's an article of faith.
Right.
So it's the culture's perspective that populated the algorithms of knowledge in our mind when it came to angels. And the other was this hyper-spiritual perspective that slowly took roots starting in the early days of the church. We had the Gnostics, and they believed in kind of that the highest form of spirituality was not physical. So the Hebrew Bible presented a physical form of spirituality where God eats with Abraham, his angels, walk among us. In fact, Paul, who was a Jewish Pharisee, he said that some have entertained angels unawares. We see their angel that rolls the stone off the tomb of Christ and sits on it, and the Bible says he sat on it. So it kind of emphasizes his physical nature. Or the angels that come to free Lot from Sodom and Gomorrah, they're so handsome that the people in Sodom and Gomorrah, who are actually used to having sex with angels, this is what the sin of Sodom is. This is why they're going after strange flesh. It's not just homosexuality. It's actually sexuality with angels. That is what's happening in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right. That would make a lot more sense. Yeah, because that's like a deeper sin right there. That's like, yo, don't mess with that, man.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is the New Testament talks about the days of Noah and the days of Lot. So it kind of connects those two things for us because it's referring to what was happening there. And that's why they see these angels and they're like, wow, we want to have relations with these guys. And But again, they looked human and they looked physical. So in the Bible, the Messiah is resurrected from the dead, and he makes a point that he's still physical. He says, I'm not a ghost, I have flesh and bone. And he asks to be given food to eat to prove his physical nature. So the physical form of spirituality is well established in the Bible. However, under the Gnostic influence, we start to see this gravitation towards hyper spiritualization, where Christ is turned into a ghost. He is in a realm of spirits. His angels are just spirits. And then in the Middle Ages, we get more of that happening because the Christians divide into two camps. One camp says, we should study God's creation, the nature, and understand how the universe functions and catalog that. And another group says, no, we don't need to know that. Let's just focus on our soul and on Christian living. And so those who become focused on the soul, they become more like the monks. And the ones that become focused on the physical universe, they form the universities, the first one in Bologna in Italy. And so this gets exasperated with the coming of materialism from England, where the philosopher David Hume proposes the idea that we can only really believe what we can see with our natural eyes. This is the age of Darwin. This is the age of atheism. This is the rise of the secular republics and the parliamentary democracies, and where church and state are separated. And the secular perspective, gradually becomes the paradigm that is promoted through the school system and the media. And so this.
One second. So basically, what you're saying is that the Nephilim influence, all of this stuff, is what we're seeing as far as the structures of government we're seeing today.
Yeah, definitely. The seed of the serpent is something that is very deeply interwoven into our society, and the top levels of government. Where the money is, far beyond the corporations, those who control the financial system in which even the corporations exist, like the banking families, like the Rothschilds and these guys, would actually be low on the totem pole. Of what is behind the screen. And definitely these have the Nephilim bloodline is very influential in the governance. And I think the parable of the wheat and tares is pointing to that very clearly, because the tares look like wheat, but they're modified wheat. And it says that when God planted his seed in the garden, the devil came and planted his seed in the garden, and this is how the tares were created. But the wheat and tares are intertwined together until the second coming. That's what the parable explains. And so it is an infestation that is deep, and that is perhaps why the resurrection of the Messiah is important, because we need a whole new body. The genetic connection that we have with these guys is beyond just these giants that are documented in history, not only in biblical history, but in all kinds of histories. It is beyond that. It is something that is deeply interwoven into the human fabric. And many people who have positions of authority have inherited this Nephilim bloodline. I could trace it all the way back to the birth of Western civilization in the island of Crete, where Minos, the son of Zeus, is the first king of the Western world, and where Satan places his throne in the city of Pergamum, and the Lord refers to it in the book of Revelation, and lays the foundation of the Western civilization with the symbol of the eagle, which then grows from its birthplace in the Aegean Sea all the way to the shores of California today.
That's
a Nephilim bloodline with it.
Right, and that's important that you bring up symbols. So let's start from there. Let's start from present day, and let's try and move back into history, because it's no doubt that the things that happened in probably because I even wanted to touch into the antediluvian world. You know what I mean? And what people don't seem to understand today is that we are heavily influenced by things that have happened thousands of years ago in biblical history, and the symbols are everywhere, and you brought that up, and I want to kind of kind of like shed some light on that. For example, if you look at all our brands that we have here in the United States and around the world, to be honest, a lot of them have, like a logo or whatever, some kind of symbol, and you're just kind of like, oh, that's, to us that means nothing. It's just like a symbol, doesn't mean anything. It's just the logo of, it's just the brand of whatever it is we're purchasing. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And that's about it. That's as far as your regular person thinks about it, But once you start learning about where the symbols came from and who's in charge of the corporations, like you said, then you start understanding that all these symbols are very purposeful. They're there to influence. They're there to perpetuate an agenda, And so whether people that listen to the show, let's say, whether you believe in the existence of these Nephilim spirits and the fallen gods, the fallen watchers or not, the people in charge of the corporations and the people, above the bankers and even the bankers, like the Rothschilds, they have a lot of language in which these people do believe that they are descendants from demigods and from the gods of in heaven and from, the what we consider the fallen ones, but they consider their gods and things like that. They believe they're descendants of these royal bloodlines created by ancient gods, and so it would make sense that these people use the symbols of those gods, of the birth of those gods or anything related to that religion created thousands of years ago in the merchandise we use today, right? And
yes.
I mean, so I think you would agree that stuff that we see is pretty intentional, right?
Yes. Jesus said you can serve only one master, God or money, but actually in the Greek he used the word manon. He said you can serve God or manon, which was the god of money. And perhaps he was identifying the fallen angels who is in charge of the economic system. Perhaps he was making a very sharp statement and kind of unveiling for us who was behind that system, because you control the world through money, right? Mm-hmm. You rule the world through money. Before World War II, guns played a very important role in ruling the world, but after World War II, it became about economy. So modern warfare is economic, and modern rulership is economic. So you rule people through money. It's how you control the world. And therefore, it ties into this system of control that goes back to the fallen angels. Now, why is this stuff even happening to us? Mm-hmm. It's because of who we are. We have lost track of who we really are. The earth is the birthplace, the incubation chamber of the sons of God. This is where Adam was placed, who is made in the image of God. This is very important to understand, that the reason we're involved in such a giant story is because of who we are and who we have always been. Why are these beings visiting the earth? Why is this system created over us? Why are we even having this conversation? Why is the world so strange? Because of the cosmic tale we find ourselves in, because of who we really are. Mm. And so once you lose sight of that, much of the story doesn't make sense. Why would these fallen angels want to control us or set up shop over us? Well, because there is a destiny that awaits us, and this destiny is something they covet for themselves. Mm. And their leader it has wanted this. And so the UFO phenomenon, the alien abductions, the history of the demigods, the reality of these beings over the nations, and all that has come to pass essentially points to the truthfulness of the biblical account. Mm-hmm. It says, look, this is all the evidence that is pointing to this story. This story explains the world in a way that matches the evidence we're gathering. Because the fallen angels, because angels in general live longer than we do, they have plans that are centuries in ahead. So they don't plan 10 years ahead, they plan 500 years ahead. And so there's a continuation. That's why the ancient stuff continues to affect the modern world.
Because of the fallen ones or
the fallen ones, yes, the fallen ones, whether it's the Nephilim, which is the offspring, the fallen ones, or whether it is their overlords, the sons of God, the watchers, the gods of the nations, these beings have a much larger timeline, and that's why ancient stuff carries into the modern world. Because it is continuing a story that is going to take centuries to unpack.
Yeah.
But we're born into the world. We have shorter lives, and we kind of get confused because we don't have this knowledge of the ancient history. We don't see how all the dots connect together. So we reinvent reality to suit us. So we go, oh, these UFOs that are flying outside of our window, these are aliens that have come from elsewhere. However, if you kind of look at the history of Earth, you see, first of all, that all civilizations have recorded these flying chariots, and all civilizations have recorded that they had offsprings with us, the way the modern abduction phenomenon records the creation of hybrids. Suddenly you have a much larger context to place the modern UFO phenomenon in, and so you need to do that.
Right. And so, okay, I'm going to just mention this for people that have never heard of something like this. So, and bring up the biblical history of this. So, in the beginning, right, God made us in his image, and he gave us the task to make Eden global. Eden was in a certain spot, and he wanted us to work the land and be fruitful and multiply and be in charge of this physical realm called Earth, right? And then along the lines, it would seem that Adam and Eve, we know that story. They were, they did what they did. But also, from my understanding of things, is in ancient Hebrew history, there are tiers of, if you ask someone in the ancient Hebrew time, like they wouldn't just say, oh, well, Adam and Eve messed up, and that's why we're in this mess, They would actually bring up the fact of what happened in Genesis 6, right? In Genesis 6, it would seem that the sons of God, or these Elohim, these fallen ones, decided to intermingle with the human race and create these hybrids. And the hybrids, of course, were... correct me if I'm wrong here, Ali. You probably know the names better than I, but all the ones like the Canaanites, the Jebusites, the Perizzites, and all those people that were, I think they were all mentioned at once, like in the book of Joshua, if I'm not mistaken. But there was all these tribes, that also were weird looking. They were hybrid people. They weren't necessarily human, and which would explain what's going on in Joshua, because God told, his people, hey, you got to wipe all these people out. Are we on the same page there, Ali?
Yeah, the book of Deuteronomy refers to the Anakim, the Raphaim, and the Zanzumim. And these guys don't have any genealogy. When you look at Genesis chapter 10, you have the genealogy of the nations, and a lot of archaeology now proves it. But these guys don't have a forefather. We don't see like so-and-so was the father of so-and-so who then birthed to the Anakim. No, they just appear out of the blue without genealogy. And they are called Nephilim because when the spies go into the land in the book of Numbers, they come back and they say there are Nephilim in the land. This was a name for a kind of being. When in the 4th century, the Bible is translated from Hebrew into the Latin of everyday Romans. Jerome, who translated the Bible, Saint Jerome, he translated the word Nephilim as gigantus, and that's how it entered into the English as giants.
Right.
And so giants is not a wrong word for it, but in our culture, it has kind of immediately a mythological slant to it. Like we think of, the story of Jack and the Beanstalk.
I would say, yeah, exactly. And I would say the word mythological itself has been hijacked to say anything myth is not real or true. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. People have decided for us what is myth and what is not myth. Correct. Like one of the most famous giants of the ancient world that is very well documented is Gilgamesh. And just a few weeks ago, I was talking to this gentleman who excavated Uruk, which is the town where Gilgamesh was king. I'm hoping to do a radio interview with him, an audio interview with him to put on my website. And it's incredible what these guys discovered matches the Book of Gilgamesh, which is this ancient document that tells the story of this Nephilim king. And it's not in the Bible, it's outside of the Bible, and it tells the story of this Nephilim king who ruled the city of Uruk. And it provides a lot of details about what Uruk looked like, what was in Uruk. And when these guys went and excavated Uruk, they found the stuff that is written in this book about this city. So what part of it is myth? What part of it is real? Well, archaeology has found the stuff to be there. So people decide for us. They go, oh, well, you know what? This part of it is real, but this part where it says that the leader was actually, a Nephilim, that part is mythology. Why? Because the person can't believe in it. So they decide for us what's myth and what's real. Well,
Right.
if the stuff in the city was found, and if this guy is mentioned in all kinds of documents, including the king list of Sumeria, that he was actually a king of Uruk, and then there's a chance that the part where it says he was a Nephilim is also true. The incredible thing about him is that it says in the book about him that the gods, removed the water from the river, like they parted the water, and they buried him in the river bed in the Euphrates, and it was a very deep river. It was much wider and much deeper than it is today, even though today it's still a mighty river, but it was a mightier river back then. And so what this guy was telling me is that using, what was it called, magneto, like electromagnetic vibrations that they send into the ground, and it reflects back like radar, and they can kind of see what's there. He said they clearly see that in the dried riverbed there is a structure, and they're dying to go and excavate it to see if that is actually the tomb of Gilgamesh.
Ooh.
They just are waiting for things to cool down in Iraq before they can resume excavations.
Right.
So even the part where the river was parted and a giant structure was built under in the riverbed is even that part is real.
Mm-hmm.
So what is myth? What is real? Well, it seems that our collective ancestors couldn't have all been nuts. Because from the Indians to the Greeks, to the Mesopotamians, to the Egyptians, to the Persians, to the Bible, they all record the age of the Nephilim, the demigods, and their influence. I'll tell you a story.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Persepolis, the ancient capital of the Persian Empire, one of the capitals. There's 4 cities. This was one of the main cities. And they had built this gigantic, pillars, incredible. And this was the same trip that I had the UFO sighting in. And we ended up in Persepolis, and my dad was an architect. He's passed away since, but he was an architect. And he said to me, this is really incredible, the stuff that was built here. Even today it would be difficult to build this stuff with the modern technology we have. I wonder how they did it back then. And there was a local fellow with his family visiting, and I could tell from the way he was dressed that he was from one of the villages around this ancient capital. And he was there, and I turned around to him and I said, hey, sir, what do you think? How do you think this stuff was built? Half jokingly, I have to confess. And he turned around to me, kind of straightened his back, and became very serious to my surprise. And he said, well, the ancient cuneiform tablets, the ancient writings left here in the Persian Empire, tell of the story of giants. And these giants were champions, and it is they that helped build these cities. I was like, wow. So there's so much knowledge, but in the 20th century, end of 19th century, early 20th century, really one man is very much responsible for all of this. His last name was Child. He was a very influential archaeologist. They decided for us that all of this was just mythology. And so they called the era of the Nephilim the mythological era. It was just a decision that was made for us after all of these writings were discovered.
I wonder who he works for.
He was a Marxist.
Oh.
He was a transplant into England from Australia. He was a devout follower of Stalin. And all of this archaeology was coming out that was saying, wow, we've found so many other writings that talk about the stuff the Bible has been talking about.
Right.
And he then took all of this
information. Mythologize it,
and mythologized it for us. And so that's what happened. Even the story of farming, how did farming start? Well, the Bible tells us that God introduced into the biosphere the first of the farmers, Adam. And as he left the garden, he brought with him all kinds of knowledge that kickstarted civilization. And his children had all kinds of knowledge, like metallurgy and music and tent dwelling. So these guys were the creators of civilization. Cain built the first cities of the world, and so they understood architecture, the measuring of things, geometry, and we see that the world was altered as these guys walked into it. So it matches what has been discovered, that our civilization is relatively new, and that farming is relatively new, and even the stuff you can farm is very different from the wild variety. Like, botanists who look into the genetic development of plants are shocked. They don't understand, how did wheat and barley have this giant leap from the wild variety to the type you can actually farm? Well, God tells us that he gave plants to Adam that could be farmed, animals that could be domesticated. And so he when he walked into the larger world out of the garden, he brought with him all of that. And so civilization started, farming started, and animal husbandry started, all of the things that have been discovered. And so this guy, Child, he created an alternative theory. He said, no, what happened was that caveman had a hunter-gatherer guy had a moment of genius. He essentially had a coup de génie, as they say in French. He had a moment of genius spark, and he discovered farming. And as he discovered farming out of the blue, then people started to stop running after their food. They gathered around the bonfire at night. They started to have conversations with each other. And through those conversations, they came up with architecture and mathematics and astronomy and all that stuff, which is totally insane because these bodies of knowledge were very highly developed, highly complex from the get-go. Archaeologists themselves are stunned. And when the archaeologists, actually the real ones, they were looking at the facts, they were stomped because even the most ancient city, Eridu, that was discovered was as developed and civilized as cities that were thousands of years later. So even the most ancient city already came built with the knowledge of civilization, which with these pillars of information that are the foundation of the world, such as mathematics, architecture, astronomy, medicine, writing, religion, the decrees of the gods, which are the algorithms of civilization. All of these things existed from the very get-go, and so they were stomped. How could this be? They were expecting to see kind of a natural development where you see little pieces of math, little huts. But no, you see pillars in the most ancient city, already pillars of a temple. So they thought, well, how did this all happen? So they turned to the writings of the ancients. They recorded their own history for us. And in that writings, they said that it was from above that the codes of knowledge were handed to them. And so this agrees with the biblical account. This agrees with the book of Enoch. This agrees with the series of revelation that has come, to the people of Israel through Moses and the prophets. And so this is really the way history developed. But because Child came on the scene, he took all this knowledge and repackaged it and said, no, caveman discovered farming, and farmers came up with civilization through their own thinking system. And that was taught through the school system and the university system and became how we understood reality.
Right.
And so the things were changed for us, and it creates confusion. The Renaissance painters give us a faulty perspective of angels. Secular archaeologists realign where is myth and where is reality. And all of this creates confusion. So now we are looking through things through a broken glass.
Right, and that would make sense because it's like, I believe it was, we had, who do you have on? Gary Wayne, and he talked about it in his book about the people who believe that they're from the lineage of these Nephilim families and things like that, or the demigods. Or they might not even believe this, but they have a task at hand, and they want to infiltrate what they call the 7 sacred sciences, right? And they want to infiltrate, they want to infiltrate the arts, they want to infiltrate, politics, they want to infiltrate the schools, all these things that can influence and manipulate society. They want to be a part of it so they can control the narrative, whatever it is that they want to, push through whatever agenda,
Well, that's because these bodies of knowledge that you just mentioned, that these guys want to infiltrate, is actually a lot more advanced and important than we think. And there's a lot more to be discovered by using them. we have a funny way of thinking about our world. We think we're primitive, and then the world of God and angels is nearly a magical place. What we don't understand is that the fact that we can actually fly planes and break the atom and splice DNA, that this is the stuff of advanced beings, that
Right.
this is the stuff that those who are made in the image of God can do.
Right.
This is the stuff of the angelic world. What makes the angels so powerful is that they understand more about how the universe operates, how God's creation works, and they can manipulate it. And they corrupt this knowledge for their purpose, and they teach us how to do it. So first of all, this is all sacred knowledge. All of these pieces of information that are the foundation of civilization is sacred knowledge. Friend, yeah.
Now, I don't know if I'm sure you've heard of it, and maybe you can give me some names. At the top of my head, I've heard, but what I want to ask is, I've heard that there's even scientists and people that are, in the cutting edge of technology today, admit, even in, I believe, since World War II, I don't know if there's anything earlier than that they've been getting knowledge or information from the other side or entities or something like that. You know what I mean? I've heard of things like that. Have you heard of things like that?
Yes. The first time I heard it was the gentleman who came up with fiber optic cable, that connects the high-speed internet.
Yeah.
In fiber optic cable, instead of electricity, what carries the information is light.
Okay.
And that's why it's so fast.
I see.
And without it, we could have not entered into the modern internet age with the audiovisual and all that stuff flying over the web. And so when he was close to his death, I saw this myself. He went on camera and he said that he had received the knowledge from an alien.
Huh.
And so there's the guys who came up with the double helix nature of DNA, Francis Crick and James Watson. They were working on it forever. James Watson said the whole thing came to him on a drive from home to work. And Francis Crick later on wrote a book where he said that human DNA was so different from all other DNA that its origins were alien. And he came up with this thing called panspermia, where he says that someone threw garbage out into space, and that garbage had DNA from aliens in it. It floated through space and hit the Earth and mixed with what was here and created humans. So whatever, that's his own idea. But still, suddenly there's this connection. And there's lots of other stories like this of even corporate leaders saying that these entities appear in their rooms. Then in the entire Masonic movement, see, people don't understand that the Masons have branches in every city and are very influential. And from the outside, they look like an old boys club of networking. You just join and it opens doors for you.
Right.
But once you're past the early stages and you begin kind of your education. So I met a Mason once, and I was talking to him, and he was very, very dedicated. He, would not reveal certain things. But what he did tell me was that
you don't want to let him know what you know.
Well, I know it was funny because we were talking. We were at someone's house, and I had been invited to someone's house, and this guy was invited, and suddenly I noticed that he was wearing the Mason badge and a Mason ring. And, I started to ask him all kinds of questions. He was forthcoming until the host suddenly turned around and introduced me as a Bible teacher. And suddenly, everything changed. But what he did tell me was that in order to go from one level to the next, you had to memorize a certain body of knowledge and perform a ritual. That was the test. And I said to him, well, what do you memorize? And he said, well, I can't tell you. Even though, he did share with me, for instance, this insight about one of the parables of the Lord, and it was a Masonic slant on it.
Ooh.
And once you kind of adopted that perspective, it became a very powerful piece of knowledge to alter the cultural fabric of society. So he told me that these things, become the source of revelation in your mind. Like as you kind of memorize this, it's a powerful idea and it starts to form thought inside of you. He said all the scientists like Galileo, Newton, all these guys, they would have not discovered the stuff they discovered if it was not because of their Masonic training. And so
the rituals.
the rituals and ideas. Because, what did God do? He planted life on the earth, and then he seeded the life with knowledge. What did the fallen angels do? They came and planted their own body of knowledge to corrupt, and we were the types of beings who could actually receive knowledge. And we are thinking souls, and we are living souls, but we're also thinking souls. And we can, Einstein said the most incomprehensible thing about the universe was that we could comprehend it. It's incredible that we can even understand. So these guys are continuing through the Masonic movement and stuff like that to infuse knowledge into the world, and also all kinds of other religions have been created that bring knowledge to us.
Right.
Now, let me just finish one more thing I'd like to just say about this Masonic thing. So I knew that the top Masons, had visitations, like you were asking, are these people do other visitations? I knew that, and so I said to him, is this true? He said to me, yes, absolutely. He said, only the guys in the very top, like Lord Bacon, have these visitations from the unknowables. He said that's the name he used, the unknowables.
Right.
So yes, there's fallen angelic visitation, fallen angelic revelation, bloodlines, and why? Because we are the sons of God. Because of who we are involved in such a crazy tale.
Man, see, that's interesting. You know what I just recently found out, actually. So I've already told you, but I practice martial arts, right?
Yes.
And one of the owners of the studio, because it's kind of like a franchise, you can own your own studio. And then one of them, he's a pretty cool guy, he just seemed a little off to me. I don't know, it just seemed weird to me. Like I got this vibe off of him, and yes. I don't know if you understand me, but like I just felt like something's off about this guy, But one time I saw him wear like a really interesting looking ring, and I was like, ooh, that's interesting. It's not a school ring. What is that, And I just kind of left it be, forgot about it. But he posted something about his son also passing a black belt test, and then I clicked on it because it was linked to all the other dojos that we go to, and then I saw that it was him. I was like, oh, cool. So I clicked on his profile, and his first picture is him wearing that little kind of like apron kind of thing, it looks like it has the Gmail logo in front, you know what I mean?
Right.
And in the middle, it had that little eye thing going on, the all seeing eye stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's a Mason. Like I didn't know that, And then I started like looking into like, I got curious, so I'm like a weirdo lurking on Facebook, you know what I mean? I'm like, what else is he about, And then, sure enough, he was like not just a Mason, he was like the guy who manages the temple in the city that it's at, And, and I was like, oh snap, he's not just no regular person here, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And then I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. But like, it's happened to me more than once, where I meet someone and they're interconnected and they're usually always in charge of something, you know what I mean? And things like that. But it's interesting that you say that. Going back to the knowledge thing, lately, of course, and I'm sure you heard of Burning Man and all these things, and it just seems that a lot of higher up people, a lot of, like you said, corporate people, CEOs, scientists, all these people that are coming up with these new amazing ideas have this connection to the spiritual realm, and they're getting information from these entities, and that's kind of what I want to make people understand, that this phenomena of the UFO, the alien, the entities from the other side is heavily connected to the spiritual realm, which is heavily connected to what was going on in the ancient time. This isn't a new thing. It's been going on. Everything that you see today around us is in some way or another revealed to us through the knowledge that we have already, and also the corruption of that knowledge. I would say that that's exactly why there's so much of this that doesn't work. Why there's so much pain and suffering in the world, because God-given gifts have been corrupted by these entities, by these Nephilim, these fallen watchers, and they're basically just corrupting what were supposed to be something to create a magnificent world to live in. And I don't think a lot of people think about that, because like if you read the Adam and Eve story, when the serpent appeared, what he had offered, it's something that basically God was offering anyways. Like it was like that's where we were headed, more knowledge, to be more like God, but not in a blasphemous way. You know what I mean? It was more like in the way that we were meant to be, and Satan just took that and corrupted it and turned it into something else. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, for his own purposes. What his first prerogative was to kill Adam, but instead of actually just killing him, because if he just killed him, he saw Adam as competition. Satan wants to become the number one principle of the created order. That's explained in Isaiah chapter 14, where the 5 I wills, the 5 ambitions of Satan's heart are outlined. And he saw Adam, who was made in the image of God and has this destiny in the creation as a whole, because the earth is the birthplace, the incubation chamber of the immortal children of God who have a role to play in the future of the creation. And he saw Adam as competition. Instead of killing him, because then he would have been accused right away, he simply made a suggestion that placed Adam in a position where he would find himself condemned to death in the laws of God. And so he could now stand in the divine court and simply say, I just made a suggestion. You made this man in your image. You assigned this destiny to him to be over us. I just made a suggestion for him to break your laws and find himself condemned to death, and he took it. And so he was a very crafty, in a way he put God on trial. He could stand in the assembly and say, I just made a suggestion. So, and so this is, you are the one who are saying this guy deserves. I mean, that's the same story in the book of Job, right? Humanity is on trial through the person of Job. Is this man worthy? Of course, because you've given him everything. Of course he's going to love you. Take it all from him. Okay, well, you haven't taken his health away. Take man's health away and he'll curse you. Take his health away. And yet Job is able to maintain his love and trust in God through his trial and prove that man has something in him that is worthy. And so this is kind of his first strategy. And then corrupting knowledge. The purpose of the corruption of the knowledge is to involve us inside his rebellion, in order to create an alternative kingdom that he is ruling. So right now, in this chapter of the story, in this phase of the tale, all of this knowledge is being given to us that has kickstarted the industrial age, and we're about to get the 5G internet that's going to propel us into AI and into all kinds of new territory.
That 5G, man, I'm concerned.
Well, it's coming. So this is.
I like that, Ali. Well, it's coming. Okay.
It's all of this are the signs of the times, and all of this is happening in this stage in order to prepare us to do battle with the second coming of Christ and his angels, because the prophecies of the Bible say we're going to go to war with him. I mean, not me, not you, but the world is going to go to war with him. I know it sounds crazy that people go to war with God, but obviously they won't see him as God, because I think the UFO phenomenon will be the way that he will be viewed. This is an alien invasion, and the people who are in charge eventually will elect their own new Führer. There'll be a new guy who will be receiving all of this occult knowledge, and he will be the new leader of the world, and he will be the one that stands against the Lord. But he will have this UFO connection, this fallen angelic connection behind him. He will do miracles. He will rally the world against the Lord, and he will have the kind of technology given by the fallen angels that will allow a war to occur. That is why there's actually going to be a war. So at this point, the purpose of giving this knowledge to us, I would even argue that starting from the days of Babylon, Babylon. Satan has tried to do this over and over again. But at this point in history, the purpose of this industrial revolution is to mount a war, a battle with the Lord, to prepare us for it, and to usher in an alternative reality that corrupts the world to the point where the laws of God are transformed and a new reality is put in. So what all of these leaders in the world, in entertainment, in the corporate world, that are connected to the Spirit and are ushering in a new world for us, it has a purpose, and the purpose is to roll back the kind of world that God's teachings usher in, and in this darkness that is coming over the world, to represent finally, a new reality ruled by themselves, with their technology, with their hybrids, and to prepare the world to do battle with the God Almighty. You listen to Madonna's new song, it talks about how a new world is coming.
Oh my gosh, I was just thinking about Madonna when you said that, because I know you said, I know it sounds crazy that people would go to war against God, but I remember seeing a concert of hers, a little clip, and she was showing, she was quoting Revelations, and she said, and the number of the beast was 666, right? And it was very antichrist, the whole video, the whole presentation, and the crowd was all about it. They were like, yeah, like they were just ecstatic, completely and fully immersed, and 100% Antichrist with like fervor. They were complete, like given over to the whole experience. And so definitely people can be heavily influenced to see or perceive anything that has to do with God with like utter violence, and give themselves over to like an antichrist system, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's like one of those things that we don't really think about. What is the purpose of all this UFO phenomenon? What is the purpose of the alien phenomenon growing, the purpose of alien visitations, and the purpose of technology growing as it is? And every time we see it on television, technology is growing, and it's for the betterment of humanity. You see how about what CRISPR's doing, and people, CRISPR spokesmen talking about how they're gonna eradicate AIDS, eradicate cancer, that kids are gonna be born immune to diseases. I mean, think about that. That's like God level things. That's like miracles. Those are miracles. Things that only God can do are now being done by the imagers of God, us, and people don't understand that. Like, those things are going somewhere. What's the end result of that?
Immortality is the end result. He's trying to prolong our life through genetics, because we see that people before the flood lived longer, and when God changed the genetic system to shorten life, it's possible to perhaps roll that back through science. Again, science is one of these occult knowledges. You see, there's 4 bodies of knowledge on this planet. The first body of knowledge comes from God's revelation to us. So God reveals knowledge. He reveals his commandments, etc. And also we see that the sons of Adam and Eve had all kinds of bodies of knowledge. They learned this in the Garden of Eden. Was it in their genes? I don't know. Was it revealed to them by angels? But definitely knowledge comes from God. The second type of knowledge comes from the fallen angels. They set up an alternative civilizations to the one that God picks, which is essentially God chooses the small tribe of Israel and speaks through them. However, the fallen angels create their own systems of governance and breathe knowledge into the human world. I mean, you look at, for instance, the Sumerians, the first of the civilizations. When the archaeologists dug up the writings of the Sumerians, they said, well, this knowledge came to us from the gods, and the knowledge that the gods gave was called Me, M-E. And it was translated into Akkadian, which is the mother tongue of Hebrew, as Parshu. That's what this was called, Parshu. These bodies of knowledge that came down, not the body of knowledge, but the very fact that these scrolls, these writings were passed down, they were called the Parshu. Well, that is what is the Hebrew word for the scrolls of the Bible, parsha. It's the same word. So the same way that God hands down knowledge, these guys handed down alternative knowledge. And so this became the second source of knowledge that was passed down into the human world. So there's knowledge that comes from God, and there's knowledge that comes from the fallen angels, and the seven sacred sciences are part of that knowledge. But there's also religions that were created by them to compete with God's worldview and to give us an alternative way to immortality and spirituality, and that's why people find it confusing. There's different understandings of God. Why? Well, because there's one that came from God and the other that came from the fallen angels. So this is the second body of knowledge, the knowledge that comes from fallen angels. The third body of knowledge is man's own knowledge. Man is thinking being. Man creates information. Man is creative. This is kind of part of our God-given inheritance. Mm-hmm. We create, we think. And so we create our own stuff, and we have our own philosophy and our own bodies of knowledge and our own observations. That's the third body of knowledge. The fourth body of knowledge is the one that begins to take root in the cities of the world. It is a combination, a weaving together, a braiding together of these three bodies of knowledge, the one that comes from God, man, and angels. And this is the fourth body of knowledge, and this is the one that most of us function in the cities of the world. We've got a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and this is what we're functioning in. That's why Paul says that we have to renew the spirit of our mind through the Word of God, because we have to study the Word of God so that we can begin to introduce God's worldview into our consciousness and test the other bodies of knowledge so that we understand what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's false. And that's how we were able to decipher who the UFOs are, who these giants were, what is going on, how does it all fit together? Because God had left a blueprint for us in the Bible that He's opening up to this generation. Previous generations didn't have this type of an insight, and we have it because we are headed towards an age of great deception, and we are headed towards an age where these UFOs are going to become more and more incorporated into the culture and even alter our perspective of the second coming. And so it's very important for us to know these things in our age, in our generation.
Right now, that's incredibly important that you bring up the religious aspect, because there's a lot of ideas, there's a lot of biblical ideas, a lot of things, a lot of prophecies that are coming, and I think these Nephilim spirits, these aliens, these fallen gods, I say that over and over so people understand that they're connected, that they are corrupting that understanding of it, and that's the only thing they can do, because they can't stop it from happening. It's happening no matter what. It's God's will. It's going to happen. So the best thing they can do is, all right, we're going to corrupt this and make a version of it, right? I think someone mentioned that there's a lot of movies that kind of joke and do like a version of for people who believe in a rapture. Like, for example, I had some people mention to me, I don't know if you saw the latest installment of the Avengers Endgame, and someone even mentioned in their head is like, hey, what Thanos did is it's like an alien rapture, like he just took like half of everyone, like he took everyone, you know what I mean? And I was kind of like, oh yeah, I guess so. It definitely could be perceived that way. And the fact that someone thought of that, it tells you that those thoughts can be planted through the media, through what you're watching, And let's take it back to those movies. For example, all of our heroes, all our superheroes, they're basically, hybrid humans. They're Nephilim. You know what I mean? So It's like turning the Nephilim into the heroes instead of God, or it's like corrupting the narrative, you know what I mean? And it's like, who wouldn't want to be a hero? Who wouldn't want to be a someone with superpowers? Like I bet you if CRISPR was like, all right, we're gonna make everyone, we're going to give someone a superpower and everyone can have it. I mean, people would, line up to change their genetic structure just so they could be a little bit more like their superheroes, and I think that'll be an easy way to even, sneak in a little mark of the beast in there, you know what I mean? And so there's so many things that are being created through all of the arts to prepare people for what is coming. And what's grown the most, and I've seen it grown unfortunately more, which is why I think your work is incredibly important, is the people are really buying into the idea of panspermia, and they're really buying into the idea that we came. Actually, the one I hear the most is that we are actually just Anunnaki, partially. You know what I mean? And I hear that a lot, that, the Anunnaki were aliens, they came here. And I don't know if you saw the movie Prometheus, but in Prometheus.
I think I did. I'm not sure. It was a while ago, but I did see the latest installment of the Avengers.
Okay. And
yeah, this is the way it's always been. You look at Hercules, right? You look at there's one of the things that I'm writing about is the altar of Zeus in the city of Pergamum. One thing we discovered when we made the documentary, I was in 1996, 1997, I was a graduate student at the University of Toronto, and I was able to do some research into the altar of Pergamum. And what we discovered was that the Lord was saying in Revelation chapter 2 that the throne of Satan was in the city of Pergamum. And so when I looked in that city, Carl Humann, who was a German engineer turned archaeologist, he had unearthed the altar of Zeus, and he even said that probably Christ was referring to this altar because this was the great thing in the city of Pergamum of spiritual significance. And, they took that altar and they brought it to Berlin and they put it in the Museum of Pergamum, which was built for the altar. And if you look at it, if you Google Museum of Pergamum, you will see it doesn't look like a regular museum. It kind of looks like a temple. And then Albert Speer, who was the architect of Hitler, he walked into the museum and he loved this altar. So he created a giant version of it for Hitler in the city of Nuremberg.
Wow.
And, inside of this altar was a bull, because that was one of the symbols of Zeus. And the leader of the congregation in the city of Pergamum was arrested by the priests of Zeus because he was accused of monotheism. And that weakened the emperor because the power of the emperor came from the gods, and many of the senators of Rome were priests of Jupiter and priests of Apollo, and they were also senators. People don't realize how intertwined religion and politics was in the Roman Empire. And so they took the Antipas, the leader of the church of Pergamum, they put him in the bull, and it was a brazen bull, and they lit a fire under him to cook him slowly. And they offered him as a burnt offering. And where this altar was, this bull, the Albert Speer, the architect of Hitler, he put the podium where Hitler would speak from. And so Hitler stood where this bull was, and he then declared a burnt offering. From this place, he declared the Holocaust. And this altar had around it depicted a battle of the gods and the titans, the Nephilim. And it presented these gods as the saviors of mankind, as those who had ushered in the post-Diluvian world, the order and peace, and they governed it through a system of empires. And so the Greco-Roman world was part of these empires. And so from the beginning, these guys present themselves as heroes to us. Hercules, the son of Zeus, a great hero. The gods are heroes. They're offsprings of heroes. And this idol, making them into idols and heroes, carries into the literature of Europe. We see it in the classical period, in the plays and poetry and writing of Europeans. They're always presented, this is what classical literature is about. So classical literature is about the writings that talk about the gods and their children. So it was in the European Renaissance period, European writers started to write again about these beings. And a lot of the poetry and plays and stuff was about them. And then the modern era, it continued through cinema. And so this is a theme that carries all the way from the ancient world to modern cinema, this idea of making these guys into heroes like Thor that we look up to. Meanwhile, the Bible teaches us that these guys don't have our good in their mind. Right. They want to replace us. They want to destroy us. They want to incorporate us. And God is the hero. God is the savior. God is the one who comes and offers his life as an atonement sacrifice in this cosmic tale. God is the one that loves us to the point where he can't keep his eyes off of us. And he is the one that gives us insight into what is going on and where he's taking us. And he has plans to prosper us and bless us and give us not only immortality, but to restore us in the cosmic order. And these guys are the bad guys. And this reversal of reality is going to lead to the second coming, where the Lord will be presented as the bad guy and his angels as the bad aliens who gave us religion, who gave us all kinds of stuff we don't like now. And then the Antichrist and the forces behind him will be presented as the good guys. So we've got a kind of a good cop, bad cop scenario where reality is reversed, not only today, but has always been the case from the beginning of history, where these guys try to lie and present themselves as the heroes and God and his angels and his teachings as the bad stuff.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you that. Like, what's the difference between these ancient mythological stories and the biblical story? And it would seem the biggest thread that runs through it is that in the mythological stories, which are not, in my opinion, mythological, they're more real than we think, they just used humans as tools to push their personal agendas, you know what I mean? And then in the biblical story, it's quite the opposite, where it's like God creates an environment for us to grow, along with him, not just tools to just use however and dispose of whenever it is we're done, And because people tend to forget that. I'm glad you also mentioned that in the real stories of these, like Thor and all of them, I'm like, you do know that those gods required like child sacrifice and all these different crazy things, and that they burn people alive. Yes. And all these and that they like did all these like sexual sex rituals and all kinds of things like that, and
yeah, because of the shows I'm on, I get all kinds of emails. I got an email not too long ago from this guy, and he said, my family goes back to Apollo. We're descendants of Apollo, and we are the ones that introduced abortion into the world.
Whoa!
And then I looked him up on the internet. And he was a veteran, high-ranking officer in the police force of this city I live in. Wow. He was retired, but he was part of the anti-terrorism units. He was a serious dude.
Yeah.
This wasn't some person with a tinfoil hat emailing me.
Right.
So we don't realize that the connections that people have to these guys, and then there's alternative religions. There's Hinduism, there's Islam, there's all kinds of alternative religions that present a different worldview to us than the biblical worldview. And again, I have nothing against the people that are under these religions. They're good people. I'm talking about the principalities and powers that are over the human condition as a whole. Mm-hmm. And I'm using kind of the biblical light in order to cut through the myth and cut through the lies and say, wait a second, if we look at the Bible as fact, then it tells us who these beings are, and therefore we can kind of wake up from the slumber, wake up from the dream, and understand what's going on. And the compelling thing is that the pieces of the puzzle, the empirical evidence, the archaeology, the modern research into UFOs, all of this stuff actually corroborates the biblical tale. It actually vindicates the biblical story. It actually makes it true that this is actually real. It adds up the way the Bible points to it. And then there's the prophecies. Only the Bible has this incredible system of future telling, where the future of civilization is told. And people say all kinds of urban myths. They say, oh, someone read it and acted out. Well, first of all, it's very complicated. It requires millions of events from coming together for it to actually occur. And it involves people who have no access to the book or no interest in reading it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Other people say it was written afterwards. Well, actually, if you look at the story and that is in these books, it's not some Jewish conspiracy where Hebrew prophets wrote these books afterwards because they didn't even understand what they were writing. They were getting pieces of the puzzle, and they didn't see the whole picture, and God wrote it that way so that it would point to him. Each prophet gets a tiny piece of a puzzle, but when we look at it from a bird's eye view, especially because of where we are in history, and we are at kind of a point of turning, a lot of these writings are now available to us. We're like on top of a pyramid looking down, where we can see the whole mountain. We see that all of it put together forms a coherent image, like programmers that are given a piece of a program, but when you press run, actually an image appears on the screen that is coherent. So this whole thing adds up together to form a picture. So these prophets didn't see the picture. They only had a piece of the program. They only had a piece of the puzzle, but it all adds up together. So the Bible is a very fascinating document because of this ability it has to tell the future. It separates it from all the other religious documents. And its archaeology adds up, its story adds up. And so this is the key. This book is the key to deciphering the Nephilim, the demigods, the titans, deciphering their overlords, the sons of God, the watchers, or the gods of the nations, and to understanding the modern day UFO phenomenon, which is the continuation of this saga, this crazy tale we find ourselves in because of who we are. And it's not a new phenomenon. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to impose a modern view into it. We have to read the building blocks from the beginning and follow the story into the modern world, and then we'll clearly see what's going on. Even the prophecies of the Bible talk about an age such as the one we're living in.
Right. No, I agree. I think that is probably the biggest thing I want people, especially if you're a believer, I want people to understand why is all of this important. Because I've spoken to, I go to a very conservative church and I've brought up certain little topics here and there because I hear them bring it up. Actually, I don't bring it up myself. I tend not to bring it up unless someone's searching. You know what I mean? I kind of listen for those keywords. If people say, "Oh, what about, have you heard of this? Have you heard of aliens? What's the deal with aliens?" Or what's the deal with bankers owning things? You know what I mean? Like I look for specific phrases and then I open up a little bit and mention certain things. And once I start going deep down a little bit, try to take them down the rabbit hole, there's a little bit of pushback sometimes, and they're kind of like, why is all of this important? Why is knowing what the alien phenomenon about is important? Why is knowing about the Nephilim important? Why is knowing about the fallen watchers, if they even agree with that narrative of what the watchers did in Genesis 6 and all that stuff, these fallen ones did it, if they even agree with that. Usually I get the whole Sethite view thing, and they always say that one question at the end: why does this matter? And if you have been listening to this episode for the last hour and 12 minutes, it's like there's a lot of reasons why this matters. There's a lot of reasons. I think it's incredibly important to understand the war that you're fighting as a believer, to put it plainly, because we believers, all of us, they're like, yeah, of course we're fighting this spiritual war. We're we can agree that there's powers in high places, powers in principalities and all that stuff. But what does that mean? What does that look like? And if you have no idea how it looks like, how can you effectively as a believer fight back? You know what I mean? How can you effectively understand what your place is if you work for a school, if you work in politics, if you at your house to govern what your kids are consuming as media, and to understand? Because I personally, for example, I have a 12-year-old daughter. I don't give her a lot of restrictions. I just inform her of a lot of things that I know, and thank God that's been enough for her to see right past even political agendas. And she's 12 years old, you know what I mean? And
yes.
And she can even see it, like, okay, they're really pushing this whole transgender thing right now, or they're really pushing this homosexual thing right now even more, or like they're really pushing a lot of different things, and she sees right through them. I don't have to worry about her being influenced by it, because now she has the knowledge of what it's trying to do. So the effect of it is significantly reduced because she understands what's going on. You know what I mean? And so that only comes with the knowledge, with understanding this knowledge. And if anybody knows, that's what Fire Theft Radio is about. That's why we call ourselves Fire Theft. It's a Prometheus reference, of us taking the knowledge, but taking it back and making people understand this is important. Like, this might seem not important, and other people that are just curious. They're just searchers, and they're curious what's going on, and that's why I'm doing the show. I want you to understand that everything's intertwined, and it's been intertwined since the beginning of human history. It's not just a new thing. The alien phenomenon, all of this isn't new. Like, it's been around, and it's continuing, and we want to make you understand what its future, what is its purpose. That way you have an understanding of how you can control your life and your children's life, and hopefully make a difference as the years come by.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to prepare people rather than to shield people. You can't shield people. You can only equip them with knowledge and discernment. And I think there is a reason God has even allowed this stuff to happen, because he expects us to search, to ask questions, to open our hearts and minds to him. And then we receive, a revelation from him as a result of faith and obedience. When you look at the modern day UFO phenomenon, to come back to kind of where we started, basically, the reason people don't see the connection with angels in the Bible and fallen angels in the Bible is because, as I said, the way it has been presented to us is through art, and that's kind of created this idea. But in the Bible, there are actually flying chariots. You look at the story of Elijah. It says that he went up in a chariot of fire and horses of fire. Well, we know that there are no such thing as chariots of fire and horses of fire. We know that doesn't exist. God had to use a kind of a vocabulary that Elijah could write, and the word in Hebrew that Elijah uses, or whoever wrote that uses about Elijah, is rekab, and the other word is merkava. Now, these two words, so the word rekab, which is the root word, means vehicle. That's actually what it means, vehicle. It means something that carries you. And it means, something that carries you. And Merkava means the same thing, right? It means something that carries you. And by extension, in the Bible, it also means cavalry. That's why today in Israel, the tanks are called Merkava, because it's cavalry. Mm-hmm. And so when the Lord returns for instance, in Isaiah chapter 66, it says that the God will come with his chariots. It says that right in Isaiah 66. It says, I think it's verse 15. It says that God will come with his chariots, and the word used there is merkava. And it says, behold, the Lord will come in fire and his chariots. And so when the Lord returns with these vehicles and with his angels, that are governed. Of course, God is beyond these things, but he's entered his creation, is interacting with it. That's why it'll be possible to present it as an alien invasion and rally the world around it. So the Bible actually presents the angelic phenomenon much more like the UFO phenomenon we see today. So if people actually had stayed true to the text, instead of painting, bird-like wings on angels, we wouldn't have this confusion today. It wouldn't be so difficult to see the connection. So in the Bible, it talks about vehicles. Now, why was it translated as chariot? Because until the modern day, there was no other vehicle than chariot. There was no point in using another word. It was redundant. To the people until very recently, the word chariot and the word vehicle were synonymous. This was the only type of vehicle there was. Mm. But actually, the Hebrew talks about something that carries, and then we have ships that carry us through the sea, and we have eventually created airplanes, and eventually created rocket ships.
Yeah, motorcycles, bicycles, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, motorcycles, bicycles, skateboards, rollerblades. Right. And so we went into the heavens, And so what happened is a gradual shift of perspective happened. we were talking about these Masonic influence into the scientific world of Galileo and Newton, all these guys. Well, gradually the idea of the universe was presented. So the Bible tells us from the get-go that God created the heavens and the earth. So we know that the setting of the tale of the Bible is the heavens and the earth, Shamayim and the Eretz in Hebrew. And the word heavens is Uranus in the New Testament in Greek. What is heavens in the Bible? Well, when you're standing on the earth, that's the earth. You're standing on the bedrock, that's the earth. Then an inch above the ground, that is where the heavens begins. So the air that is all around you is the heavens. And so the sky where the birds fly, that's the heavens in the Bible. And the area outside the earth where the sun and the moon are, that's the heavens in the Bible. And the area beyond the sun and the moon, that's the heavens in the Bible. And then there's the heavens of the heavens, which is where the temple of the heart of time and space, where God is. So the translators into English, they said, well, wait a second. In English, we have more precise words. We've cut the heavens up into pieces. So if the Bible says, oh, the birds were flying in the heavens, the translator says, oh, well, in modern day English, we have a word for that. We call it sky. So they translate it as sky. If we're talking about the sun and the moon, well, the translator says, oh, well, that's the heavens. And so we'll say, oh, there's the sun and the moon and the stars in the heavens. This kind of it creates this translation problem. We don't realize that anything a few inches off the ground, all the way to the temple, the heart of time and space, has the same word used for it. All that is the heavens. So there's only the heavens, which is the air and outer space and whatever is beyond it. And then there's the earth, the rock upon which we stand. These are the only two things. And then there is the host of the heavens and the host of the earth. And so there's these beings that travel inside of this thing we call the heavens, which involves the universe, which involves the atmosphere. And then there's the host of the earth, which is Adam. So gradually we have the concept of the universe that comes on board, and it starts to gradually change our perspective. Oh, we're not in the heavens, we're in the universe. Okay. And then the idea of the heavens is pushed into this other realm, like there is this other world out there. It's in another dimension, or it's in another place. It's something religious people believe in. It's a myth. It's this other place called heaven. So now we have the universe, that's where we live in, and then there's this other place called heaven. So our biblical perspective changes. We no longer understand that we are living in the heavens and the earth, or that there's the host of the heavens and the host of the earth. We're in the universe. And then heaven is a religious concept. And then we are told gradually that we evolved here. Oh, okay. And so this further changes our perspective. Then we can imagine that life evolved elsewhere. And so the concept of the alien is born. So suddenly there's the universe and there's aliens in it. We're no longer understanding that we are in the heavens and we are on the earth, and that there is the host of the heavens and the host of the earth. So suddenly these beings that we see coming and going to the earth, we see them through this newfound view of reality, the universe and aliens. And then we see the Bible through this handed down view of something religious people adhere to, that there is this other realm where these magical beings live in, angels, and we're not quite sure if they're physical, maybe they're ghosts and spirits. And so gradually everything gets fragmented, and we can't see how the dots connect together. But once you kind of clear your eye and you say, okay, there is the secular perspective of the universe and aliens, fine, that's one perspective, let's put that on the board. And then there's the biblical view of the heavens and of the earth, but it's actually talking about the same thing that we're living inside of. It's not talking about another magical realm, it's talking about the very realm we're in. And then there's the host of the heavens and the host of the earth. And wait a second, they seem to travel using these vehicles. Even God himself is going to return with them. And even the Lord maybe was ascended into one, because we know that he went into a cloud, and then we see in the prophecies of the book of Daniel that the Son of Man arrives to the Ancient of Days in a cloud. Well, what kind of a cloud exactly exists both in the earth and in the throne room of the universe? He went into a cloud and he appears in the courtroom of God in a cloud as well. So something carried him. And we are told that these things exist in the Bible that carry you. They're called the Merkava, they're called the Rikab. We see them also in the book of Ezekiel. And people will say, well, why does God need a spaceship? What do aliens need a spaceship for? Well, first of all, you don't want to now take a giant leap and turn these things into Star Trek and impose on it 20th century sci-fi. You don't want to go to that extreme. It's a mystery what these things are. And yet you don't want to go to the other extreme of completely omitting them or spiritualizing them.
Yeah, I'm already going that I think they got a Millennium Falcon in. What's going on here? I just went.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Gabriel is on his way to Earth, and then they tell him, sir, the carburetor has a problem. We're going to have to make a pit stop.
Earth is 4 parsecs away.
It's not quite like that. I don't know how it exactly works. Does Gabriel or Michael go inside of one, and the next second they're on Earth? Is it a gateway? Is it a vehicle? Does it actually travel? Like Einstein said that if his famous theory, E equals mc2, which is energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. So the idea essentially he has is this: if you take a piece of mass and you propel it in the universe at the speed of light squared, it will turn into energy. And if you take energy and if you slow it down at the speed of light squared, it will turn into mass. This is how he solved the transfer of mass to energy and the transfer of energy into mass. So what if you get into one of these vehicles and get accelerated to the point where it changes the fabric of the vehicle into energy, and then you enter into another realm, still using the vehicle, but now you enter into another realm because of the speed at which you traveled, the nature of things changed on you. And then when you come this way, you slow down, and that's why it turns into mass. I don't know. I'm just making it up. Right. All I'm saying is that this is a mystery, but there is something real mentioned in the Bible and recorded by cultures all around. Even Josephus, who recorded the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, said there was these red objects on top of the city, these spheres, and the armies of Alexander saw them. Many people have recorded it. In the Islamic tradition, these things are recorded as well. And then they're recorded in the Bible, and then they're eyewitnessed today by people. But because we've lost the connection, because we don't understand that we are still in the heavens and the earth, we think we're in the universe, because we've adopted evolution, which is just a hypothesis. It's not even for sure here, but we've assumed that it happened elsewhere, and we've forsaken the biblical narrative, which provides such a rich understanding of all of these things to us. We have had an alternative perspective of reality that we're born to in our age. We lack the knowledge of history. We lack the knowledge of the Bible. We can't put it together. And so we suddenly see this fragmented, disconnected thing. Oh, wow, there's UFOs today. Wow, where did that come from? And this has opened the door wide for deception. What is the number one perspective that people have of the UFO phenomenon? It's that the saviors of the world have arrived, that they're here to rescue us, and they're here to bring us, good news. Well, here's something fascinating. When I was looking, actually, I think I can add this right here if I can quickly open it up. Sure. When I was looking into the history of the modern day UFO phenomenon, I came across So in 1949, so you have to understand the UFO phenomenon started to be really studied by the government starting in the late 40s, in 1948, which, by the way, corresponds to the year that Israel became a nation again and ties into biblical prophecy. The very problem of, what are these UFOs was addressed in February of 1949 by Professor George Valley, acting as a member of the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board. In a top-secret report, he told the Pentagon his theories about the alien civilization that might well be coming to the Earth. Such a civilization might observe that on Earth we now have atomic bombs and are fast developing rockets. In view of the past history of mankind, they should be alarmed. We should therefore expect at this time above all to behold such visitations. So what's interesting about this theory that this guy out of the blue tells the Pentagon that, look, we've developed atomic weapons. We're about to perhaps, we've developed rockets and we're about to go into the heavens. And these guys don't want us to bring our warlike ways into the galactic community, so they've come to visit us. Well, a few years later, we get this Hollywood piece, which is propaganda, called The Earth Stood Still. I think it came out in 1951 or 1952.
Right.
I think everyone should watch this movie. It talks about this alien who's come to tell us that they're a lot stronger than us, and unless we change our warlike ways, we won't be welcomed into the galactic community. Now, what's crazy is that this theory has become the main theory of the UFO world. The UFO phenomenon has a lot of believers. In China, UFO groups have millions of adherents. I meet people all the time who are very influential people in the city and who confide to me in private that they have given their hearts to the UFOs, that they believe that the saviors of the world have arrived.
Oh, wow.
So this crazy theory that is suddenly out of the blue comes up at the very genesis of the UFO phenomenon, before we've been able even to do any research into it, before we've been able even to look at the facts in order to come to a conclusion based on facts. Suddenly these ideas start to float, and they even come into Hollywood and begin to educate the masses that the saviors of the world have arrived. And this idea over time becomes the number one perspective of the UFO phenomenon. The people around the world, from China to the Middle East to the Americas, that believe in UFOs, and you have no idea how big this is. Listen, I'll give you an example. Let's say I want to promote my documentary UFOs, Angels and Gods on Facebook, right? Mm-hmm. I'll go on Facebook and I want to run an ad. Well, I get the statistics. I put in keywords and Facebook tells me how many people are talking about this. So I'll put, let's say, end times, and I'll get a few million people. Like 4 million people. I put in like the Book of Revelation. I get 8 million people. That's like high numbers for this type of topic. But I put in ET or UFOs. I get upwards of 20 million people talking about it at the same time.
Wow.
So there's more people interested in ET and UFOs than in God and religion today, and in the Bible. This is how big it is. I mean, you look at the movie E.T. that Steven Spielberg, who's really big into UFOs. He created many movies that based on research, like the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right, which is actually a term of ufology. So his movie called E.T., the way it worked in those days was a movie would go on in the theater. Once it stopped selling enough tickets, it would be transferred into VHS. E.T. ran for 7 years
wow,
in cinema before it transferred into VHS.
Talk about propaganda right there.
This is how popular E.T. is. And so the fallen angels are using this new mask they've put on. They're no longer the gods of the ancient world. They're the modern day gods. They're aliens. They're using this to pump this idea into the world that they are the saviors of the world. They've arrived. And that's what you see, people talk about the Antichrist. Well, actually, in the Greek, in the Bible, in the letter of John, it doesn't say Antichrist. It says Ante-Christus. Mm-hmm. Not anti, not A-N-T-I, but ante, A-N-T-E. Mm-hmm. Ante-Christus, which means pseudo-Messiah, instead of the Messiah. Mm. The one that competes and says, no, I am the savior of the world.
Right.
Right, and so these guys are setting up the show so that when they put their guy, when the dragon gives his power to the beast and he receives the final throne, and these guys have been given power to kings of the earth all the way from the days of Mesopotamia. Everyone always believed that power came from above. And so when these guys finally give their throne to the final Antichrist, then he will present himself as the savior of the earth. He will have all kinds of technological goodies and signs and lying signs and wonders and miracles. He makes fire come from the sky. Maybe they'll say, hey, you can turn salt water into drinking water. Oh, the environment, that's huge. I've been researching this since the mid 1990s, and I can tell you that in the modern day UFO phenomenon, the abductees always talk about how they are told that the environment is going to become an issue, and that these guys are going to save us from natural disasters. And I started to see this in the middle of the 1990s. Now,
it's funny how these alien agendas line up with current political agendas.
with the United Nations, like you were saying, Gary Wayne's research into how these guys are setting up shop in the United Nations, and the way it's done is through the culture. So the people who work in the United Nations don't necessarily believe that they're doing Satan's work, but they have been taught a worldview that they should stand up for that actually ties into his agenda. It's just done very naturally, It's weaved into the fabric of the culture. So the environment, if you Google Johnny Mack, who was the head of psychiatry at Harvard University, he became one of the world's top alien abduction researchers and shocked the academic world in 1994 when he wrote the book Abductions. He goes to, I think it's Zambia. It's one of the African countries. This private school has this massive UFO sightings. These aliens, like actual beings, arrive in this schoolyard as these kids are playing. It is terrifying for these kids. And they have contact with them. And then Johnny Mack goes down to talk to the kids. I mean, you should Google this. Like the teachers are talking about that. These little kids, like primary school kids, are talking about this thing. And one of them starts talking about the environment and how it needs to be saved. And Dr. Mack says to him, did you have these ideas beforehand, or did you have these ideas after you had this contact? She says that these ideas poured into her head as she looked into the eyes of one of these beings.
Ooh, Wi-Fi.
So this agenda grows. Now, I remember reading a book in the 1980s about the environment, and it was these guys saying, hey, there's this thing called greenhouse effect.
Right.
The ozone layer is disappearing, and they're like, well, yeah, maybe it's real, maybe it's not. This scientist philosopher from France, he was saying, look, in Beijing, there's a lot of pollution, but roses still grow in the heart of the city. So obviously life is much stronger than we think. This shouldn't be a problem. But gradually over time, I saw the environment become more and more this hot topic issue, to the point where now you can't get elected unless you champion the environment. I mean, this age of Trump is kind of maybe a last window. Who knows what's going to come next? But the environment is first and foremost. Therefore, there is an agenda, and it's going to tie into this reign of these guys. They're going to present themselves as the saviors of the world, and environment is going to be one of the hot topics. And they may give us toys and technology that saves us. Oh, you want to turn salt water into drinking water? It's too expensive, but not if you have this toy. And there's a guy, his name is Stephen Greer, and he's a big proponent of the aliens are our saviors. And he does talk about gifts of technology being given to us. And so we are headed into this new world, which is topsy-turvy. And these guys have started from the get-go to pump this idea into the culture that they are the saviors of the world. But the real research, like Dr. David Jacobs, you look at our documentary, we've documented, in the second half.
Which documentary is that? UFO?
UFOs, Angels, and Gods.
Okay, right.
You can watch it for free on our website, thinkagainproductions.com, and sign up for the newsletter if you want to. You'll see the real research into the UFO phenomenon. We've interviewed Dr. David Jacobs, one of the foremost researchers. It presents a very dark reality. The facts are very different from the propaganda.
Right. No, and I think one of the interesting things that I want to kind of like people to pay attention to is that the alien phenomenon and what they propose a lot of the times is interesting. Like I've heard a lot of people who said, hey, aliens admit that Jesus was real, but he's not God, and that aliens admit, they always kind of want to demystify Christianity, kind of take away Jesus' deity, which I find very interesting, like they talk about him in a very in a way where it's like, oh yeah, no, he was there, but they compare him to other teachers, and don't really give him his god status. The other thing I notice is that they always they always line up with the current political climate agenda. You know what I mean? Because as you well know, probably, I mean, anywhere, if you watch television, or if you know what's going on, the United Nations especially is really pushing for certain changes because of climate change, right? And they have all these things going on, and to me, anything, of course, obviously, that the United Nations is kind of helping push is incredibly, like, I watch it always with like a really sneaky eye, because I'm like, well, why are you doing that? Like, what is that for? And from what I can see is it would seem that they want to control even the climate part with government, because if you can control climate, with government laws, you can control the people that are affected by the climate. You know what I mean? And so it's like one of those things where I feel like it's another form of control that is kind of sneaking up on people by using the climate change as an excuse. Like, we all need to get together and implement laws and do all kinds of things.
Exactly. That's it. We have to all get together. It's a transnational concern. It's not a geopolitical concern. Some people will take sides with one country and others will take sides with another country. It's a global threat. We all have to get together under one seat of power and support it in order to deal with this mighty threat that affects life everywhere. So that's one of the benefits of using this. Now, are they creating some of this themselves? Are these forces actually creating this weather manipulation? Well, I find interesting that the weapon of Zeus was a thunderbolt, and it seems like well, that's another myth. But if you Google HARP, which I put in my 2006 documentary, I have a picture of HARP in there at the end. If you Google HARP, which is in Alaska, it's the University of Alaska and the U.S. Navy have combined forces to create this weapon that is called HARP. And well, they don't say it's a weapon; they say it's weather experimentation. Mm-hmm. But interesting thing is that it can ionizes the atmosphere and shoots directed bolts of lightning as a weapon. When Putin took over Crimea in Ukraine, the port of Crimea, when he seized the port of Crimea after Ukraine elected a non-Russian supported leader, President, because Obama decided that he would put sanctions, but maybe he wanted to send a strong message to Putin, so he may have used some of the big guns that wasn't in the news. But the Russian government put out an official news release, and I saw this with my own eyes. I read it. It was in the news. It wasn't some conspiracy thing, where they said that Obama had used HARP on them, this weapon, and that this was a weapon of mass destruction that had been used. And the Russian army said that they started to see these clouds appear in the atmosphere, and these clouds were not natural clouds; they were not normal clouds. And then they experienced a massive earthquake after that. And this was Obama sending a warning that the American military might is stronger than the Russian one.
Ali, you got to get out of my head, man, because I was thinking about something similar, and I forgot who it was, but it was another political conversation that I believe it was a congressman or someone important went over to somewhere in the Middle East, I believe. And I don't know if this rings a bell. Maybe you can add some more details, but it was in the top of my head, and it had to do with this kind of weaponry. It had to do with something like that, and apparently the conversation didn't go well. They didn't have an agreement, and he gave this person, I don't know, gave some ambiguous threat as to, okay, well, something about earthquakes, something about water or something like that. And I couldn't remember the quote exactly. And anyways, there in the Middle East, they had a little bit of an earthquake, and it caused sort of a tsunami kind of thing, and it flooded where it is that they had the conversation. You know what I mean? And I was kind of like, that sounds interesting. But I don't know, did you hear anything like that?
I didn't hear that one. However, I can see that it can be used as a weapon. It can be used as a way of uniting the world behind a leader. It can be used as such a threat that these guys can give us their miracles and wonders and help us and look like good guys and endear us to themselves. I don't know how it's going to go down, but I see that technology is being introduced into a planet that's constantly altering reality. I see that our values are being constantly changed, and that there is an agenda. There's right now we're going to have 5G internet that's going to bring, all kinds of technology. It's going to be the Internet of Things is coming online. All the world's going to be changed because of 5G as much as it would change when the internet itself came.
Oof.
People don't have no idea what's around the corner, but I've been researching it. There's a lot of technology that can't work without 5G, the Internet of Things and AI.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get the wearables, so glasses. Instead of walking down the street looking at your phone, you're going to just have a glass. Apple, which is the king of mass, introducing things in the mass market, is scheduled to introduce its glass in 2021. And so we're going to have first the wearables and then the implants, because what's the point of wearing something? You just put it inside of your head, kind of like Black Mirror episodes where you have an implant and then you stick a magnet to it, and suddenly right directly on your nerve and your eyes you get projected images.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of where we're going. It's going to happen naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have these threats. Then we have this alternative perspective, and then we have God, who has his own agenda about history, and he's going to intervene. He's going to intervene in history, and the reason he's going to intervene in history is because all of the stuff we've been talking about is the continuation of an age-old tale that began in the Garden of Eden. Mm-hmm. Because of who we are, where we are, and the story we find ourselves in. This is not like, this is the real world. We're just a bunch of, Americans and Canadians and this and that running around living our lives. And whoopie-dee-doo, over there's the supernatural and there's this religion. No, we have never been these people. We have always been in this great cosmic tale. We have always been the children of the one who was made in the image of God. We have always had the influence of these fallen angels and the influence of God shaping our history. There is a reason we thirst for the truth. There's a reason we seek immortality. There's a reason we search for God, is because of who we are. The reason we're mortals and we're fallen and we're broken is because of historical events that happened long ago. The reason there are hybrids among us today is because there have always been hybrids among us. The reason there are chariots and UFOs we see today is because this has always been the case. None of this is new, and the Word of God is a light that has always, out of compassion, God has said, I don't want you to live in darkness. Here is really what's going on your planet. This is who you really are, and this is the plans I have for you. And so it is important, I think, for us to pay attention to these things, open our hearts and minds, and receive the Lord, as the time is short, and we are living in the age spoken by the prophets long ago. This is the time of the second coming. I mean, there's no other way to say it.
Right. Amen to that, Ali. There was so much more I wanted to ask you, but we ran out of time today. Maybe we can do a volume 2 some other time.
Yeah, let's do another show.
Yeah, let's do, because we have volume sets on our show, so I definitely have a lot I still want to ask you. More like regular, just kind of have fun with the history of the supposed Nephilim infiltrated in our history kind of thing, which we really didn't get into, but I wanted to go there, so some other time. But before we head out, is there anything you want to kind of plug, maybe where people can find you and anything you're working on that you want to announce?
Yes. Go to my website, thinkagainproductions.com, and sign up for the newsletter, because I'm going to be communicating. I'm putting up a series of videos on YouTube. You can watch my documentary, UFOs, Angels, and Gods, for free. And if you like it, share it on Facebook and wherever you want. And then sign up for the newsletter, because there's 10 new videos coming that are going to be explaining the documentary in detail and kind of opening up all of these topics that we're talking about. I'm writing a novel right now, and it's going to be kind of a fiction that brings the research of my documentary into a fiction. And then I'm working on this new project called The Three Princes: the Prince of Greece, the Prince of Persia, and the Prince of Israel. And I'm going to kind of be talking about how is it that the fallen angels have divided the empires of the world, even the ones that we live in today, and how a lot of the geopolitics we're seeing today is a result of this angelic war. It's really, the Lord has opened my eye into this. So you want to receive all this information and stay tuned. You can sign up for the YouTube channel we have. And the Facebook page I have, I mean, you can like me or friend me personally, but the information you're interested in is probably on my UFOs, Angels, and Gods Facebook page. That's the one you want to like, and you can also message us through it, and we're very responsive. I also have a Twitter account, Think Again Productions Twitter account that you can follow if you're on Twitter. And I think that's about it.
Awesome. Well, stick with me, Ali. Folks, listen to these tunes, and we will be right back.